CSIS 2440 is filmed before a live studio audience.
So the other day when we first started this Palindrome site, for the first time ever, I had my phone sitting out on the table. If you've been in my classes before, you know I keep my phone locked up in my bag, but I leave it on my table during this class because I don't have a clock in this classroom, so it's my clock. So it's sitting right here, hearing me say the word palindrome about 1,000 times. And I believe that Facebook figured that out because that day, this image showed up on my Facebook feed. And I've had that happen so many times that there's proof that that's a real thing. So I'm not being all weird and conspiracy theory. But this is really cool though. Apparently the Palindromus is a documentary about the World Palindrome Championship. I don't know what you do in the World Championship, if you write palindromes on the fly or what that is. But there's a whole bunch of fun ones on the screen there. All right, so let's dive into what we're going to be dealing with today. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off the other day with arrays. So what I'm going to do first, I want to show you what I did with the files we looked at last time. So last time we were on Palindrome B. So I'm going to quickly open that up and just show you the original one for just 2 seconds. And then I've already copied over, and now we're on doing Palindrome C, so we have a record of what we did on that other one. And if we look here, here's index for Palindrome B. Mostly it's the same. Okay, I think I cleaned up. Okay, so what I did, I added a couple things. Number one, I added a main tag around the body here, around this section. I also added a section tag right here, which is wrapping around every time we output a palindrome. Right, this right here is looping through the array of palindromes here, and I'm putting a section tag around each one. And so all this stuff ends up being in a section from this output function. Also, I added section around this so that it also is in the section tag. And the reason for all of that is because I made a huge style sheet that's going to make the thing look different. And if you watch the video from last time, the very end I showed what it looks like with the new style on it. Not the best looking thing, but it's better than what we had. Okay, so that's all the changes I made. So this is the old one. There's no difference other than just those sections in the main tag. Okay, so this is what we have. The PHP has not changed one bit at all. All right, we're going to get back to this in a minute, but I'm going to take a small little tangent here and talk a little bit more about how arrays work. So I'm going to make a separate file here. Okay, let's do a 2-second recap here of what we remember about arrays. All right, I'm going to make an array called Metallica. All right, those are the 4 members of the band currently. If I wanted to see Lars, I wanted to print that out, what would I have to do?
Print Metallica square bracket 0.
Okay, we're going to use echo, but yeah, print will work as well. Metallica square bracket 0. There we go. If I do that, let's go back to the browser, and this was called arrays.php, and it prints out Lars. Fabulous. No HTML here. If this were a real site, there'd be HTML, but this is just for demo purposes. This is just for demo purposes. Okay. Obviously, if I wanted to see James, I would do number 2, and so on down the line. Okay. But did you know that you could, if you wanted to, assign those what index you want them to have? So if you don't want your array to start at 0, you can do this. Instead of that being the 0th element, I can make it the first element, and I would do it this way. I'm saying 1, I shall give you the value of Lars. Key 1, you shall be Lars. Key 2, you shall be Kirk. Key 3, you shall be James, and key 9, you shall be Robert. Whatever you could put 9 if you wanted to. There you go. So now those indexes are no longer 0 through 3; they're 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so now if I put 2, it's going to give me Kirk. Right now it's showing James, but if I save this and refresh it, it will now show me Kirk because he's number 2. So what's going on here? We just changed it from being what normally is an index array, right, to what's called an associative array. Where now 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are a key, and the value is Lars or Kirk or James or Robert. That's called a key value pair. To be a little bit more fun, you can do this. Let's test your Metallica knowledge. Who is Lars? What's his role in the band? Thank you, drums. Oh man, Kirk? Kirk is guitar. James?
Are you alive? Are you alive?
The vocal beast. And Robert is bass. Now, Lars is no longer the 0th element. Lars is no longer the 1st or the 1st element, as we had a moment ago. He is the drumsith element. Right? I know it's a weird way to say it, and it's not probably proper, but that's how I get it to click in your brains, hopefully. So if I want to see Lars, I do Metallica drums. Refresh, and there we go, Lars. Or James is the vocalith element, like so. Dig it? All right, so check this out. Just like before, I can do a for each loop, right? No problem. Okay? Now, what can I not do anymore? What kind of loop can I not do anymore? A for loop. Because I can't use the index I or whatever because there's no index anymore. There's no number. Okay, so in fact, just to prove that point, if I try to do the 0th element, I get an error. Okay? So the question was, what happens when I look for the size of the array? Size of the array doesn't care if it's an indexed array or an associative array. It just cares how many elements are there. And so the size of this array would return 4. The reason you can't do a for loop is this. I equals 0, I is less than size of Metallica, I plus plus. Okay, if I want to say echo Metallica, what do I put in the square brackets? If I put I, just like we saw down here, that won't work, right? Because the 0th element doesn't exist. So if I pause this for just a minute, right, if I try to say echo Metallica 0, that gives me this error on the screen here, because 0 isn't a thing. So when I loop through this array here, and I get to the I element, well, what's I the first time? 0, right? As we saw, that won't work. Then it's going to be 1, and there's no such thing as Metallica 1 either. That'll also give me an error. And so leaving line 5 through 6, you'll get that error 4 times, because each time there's no such thing as a 0th element, a 1 element, a 2 element, a 3 element. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay, so since we can't do this, we have to use a for each loop, right? So let's go back to our syntax on the for each loop, and we just simply say for each Metallica as member or whatever we want, you know, we're picking out each one, call it member, call it X, call it Beavis, doesn't matter what you call it. The only one that matters is this one. So for each Metallica, in your head, add the word element in there for each Metallica element, treat it as this variable called member, and then all I got to do is just echo out member. Now that will echo out each member one at a time. Let's tack on a break there so that we don't have them all on the same line. And now we get each member of the band, right? So that works whether it's an associative array or index array or whatever, okay? But the question that came up a second ago was, what about if I want to see, I want to print out and say drums equals Lars or something like that, or the drummer is, or whatever, something along those lines. The way you do that, same thing with the for each loop, but now what you do is you put the name of whatever you want the key to be called. So call it key, it doesn't matter. The key is drums, guitar, vocal, bass. Those are the 4 keys. So put key, and again, it doesn't have to be called key. Call it whatever you want, like that. Now in your loop, you will have access to the key, which is assigned here, and the member, which is assigned here. So now I can echo out, I can say member is member, and then I can say, and like their role is the key value. In fact, maybe let's change this from key to role. What's their role in the band? That's a better variable name, I think. Like that. And now when we print this out, and we'll put the break in there, notice I'm just sticking it all inside the quotes because I'm using double quotes, and you can just dump your variables right in when you do that. When I refresh it, now it says member Lars, roll drums, member Kirk, roll guitar, and so on down the line. Right? Does that make sense? So the question being, Is it like Java? Is there a bunch of array methods that you can use, like sorting and all these different ones? And remember the difference here, if this were Java code, this would be a class. We would have a class and we'd have built-in methods to the class. And this is not object-oriented. This is just a function out there called array, right? It's just a function. And so for each is just a function, and it's just a regular old function. To get those kinds of things that you're talking about, you can make your own classes, number one, or there are, because this can be object-oriented, or number two, there are, like you notice we use the size of function, right? That's nothing to do with an array class like it would be in Java. It's just a function. It's a function that you can hand it something and it'll count it. That's all it is. So all these are just plain old functions. In the Java world, all of those are children of the object class. There is no object class in this world. There is no default classes. There's no library that you have to pull in or anything like that. It depends on your perspective. Yeah, I think it's easier and better, but they're just functions. They're just a whole bunch of functions that you have access to. And so that's our goal every day, is to learn a few new functions, really. Once you understand the syntax of the language, then it's just about learning some new functions. Okay, so now we got this little premise here of associative arrays. This brings us to getting to a form that we can process, believe it or not, where somebody can enter input and then we can grab the data and do something with it. So let's take a look at this idea here of a superglobal. There are a handful of what are called superglobals that are part of the PHP language. We know what a global variable is, right? It's a variable that's available inside the page, and inside your function, if you want to get a hold of it, you have to use the global keyword. These superglobals are variables that are available everywhere in all of your PHP pages, and any PHP page that's ever created in the entire planet ever can access these variables from anywhere without using the global keyword. I can get them in the function, I can get them in the code, I can get them anywhere. Okay? Here are the superglobals right here. These are 4 of them. We're going to maybe talk about the first one there, globals. Server, files, and env, we're going to save for later. The server one has some stuff stored in it about the server you're on, about the URL you're looking at, and some other stuff like that. We'll look at those another day. The ones we're going to focus on today are here: the get, the post, and the request variables. And then there's 2 other ones we'll talk about another day: session and cookie. Right? The bottom 5 are the big ones we're going to deal with. We'll deal with server and in a future day, and we'll deal with globals maybe today. But those 3 in the middle: get, post, request. We'll start there. PHP global form variables. These are the 3 that you use whenever you make a form and you click the submit button. These 3 variables are everything you need to know about. You got to know these like inside and out, okay? So here is some code here. This is some form code. So the way these work out, you choose one of these, and that the whole rest of the lecture is about what those 2 things do. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you put a URL here. When you click submit, you will go to that page. Wherever that page is, you'll go there. If I put in there in my thing, go to Amazon.com, it will go to Amazon.com. From my form, it'll go to Amazon. It won't do anything once it gets there because Amazon doesn't know what to do with my code that I'm going to try to send it. Okay, but it will go there. This is what the form looks like roughly. I add a little bit of style to make it show up, but that's, remember, the user's going to click this. Okay, they're going to put some stuff here. We're going to say they're going to put Beavis Jones. We'll see that in the next few slides. That's what they're going to put there. They click submit, and then the magic happens. All right, let's get that guy out of the way and start by looking at what happens if we choose post as our variable, as our method. Right, we'll look at get afterwards, but if we choose post, these 2 variables matter when we choose post. This one and this one. The get doesn't exist for the moment, and it won't exist on your page if you have post in your form. When they click submit down here, here's what happens. These things right here that you named, whatever you name them, become variables with values, the values that are in the form right there, and they get added to this request variable. Now this request variable is an associative array. So is the post variable, because that's the next thing that happens, is they get added to the post variable. Now this is an associative array, so what's really happening there is this is created. There now in the post array there's a first nameth element, Just like there was a drumsith element for Lars a minute ago, and then there's a last nameth element. There's also that exact same thing in the request array. Okay? And those names here come from whatever you named your fields. That's what gets created. Dig it?
Dig 'em.
All right. The values that get assigned are whatever they put inside right there. And so as I mentioned, they're going to put Beavis Jones. So now in the post array, we have access to the first nameth element, which happens to be equal to Beavis, and the last nameth element, which happens to be equal to Jones. And in the request array, we have access to those. So now in my code, if I want to do something with that, I can grab it right out of the post by just simply saying echo post first name, and it'll echo out Beavis. All right? That's all there is to the post, really. It's pretty straightforward. The get gets a little bit weirder. But how do we feel about the post?
I never needed anything from you, and all I ever asked was for the truth.
So let's understand the get. This is the one that's a little bit trickier. It starts off similar, okay? Same idea. We're going to use these names, and we're going to choose get, and they're going to put something there and click the submit button, right? But there's a little added extra thing, okay? Remember, this will have some value filled in, but with the post or the get. There will be a value there. I just have it in brackets to show you put a URL there. In this case, we're going to assume that the URL for action is stonecoldprofessor.com. All right? That's important for understanding the get. Okay. Either way, when I have get or post, when I click submit, we get redirected to Stone Cold Professor. That's what happens. Okay. Now, if I have get, starts off the same. The get and the request both get these variables that I mentioned a minute ago. So now in the get variable and in the request variable, I now have a get first nameth element and a last nameth element and so forth, right? But the extra thing that happens is also those variables end up in the URL. They get tacked onto the URL. So we'll look at what that looks like in just a minute. First thing, again, just like before, we have the first nameth and the last nameth, and then those are equal to Beavis and Jones or whatever they put in right here. But in the variable, here's what it looks like. That first name becomes this. There's a little question mark there that says, okay, starting right there, everything after that's going to be variables. The first variable is called first name, again, because I called it first name here. Its value is Beavis. So literally, if you watched your screen, and we'll do this in a minute, if you watch your screen in the URL browser, up in the URL in the browser, when you click submit, poof, that stuff appears right there in the URL. Okay? Now it redirects because we're on, magicreviewed.com, and we clicked this button, it took us off the Stone Cold Professor, but it tacked those on to it when it took us there. In fact, if I put Amazon.com in here and I clicked it, it would take me to Amazon.com and it would have first name equals Beavis in the Amazon.com URL. Just adds them right to it. Okay, it does the same thing with last name. And it separates each variable with an ampersand. So I can have as many variables as I want as long as I separate them by an ampersand. The question mark separates the URL from the variables. Ampersands separate each variable. So far, so good? So a little recap of what happens here, okay, from the beginning. You put some URL here, always. You always have to put a URL there. If you don't, the default is the page that you're currently on. It'll just refresh the page, okay? In our case, we put Stone Cold Professor. The next thing is you choose post or get for your method. If you choose get or post, no matter what, if you choose either one of those, that variable is always created. The request variable is always created. If you choose post or get, that will always be created, no matter what. What changes is what happens on the left side of the screen there. Either above the dotted green line or below the dotted green line is where you go next, depending on if you put post or get. Okay, so you're going to choose one of those. If you choose post, you end up doing this. If you chose get, then you end up doing this. So I want to make sure the get part of it makes sense. Then we're going to add one little extra thing to it. You good? One more wrinkle with get. This is a two-way street. Okay? So look at the slide again. Remember, if I choose post, the post variable is created and the request variable is created at the end. If I choose get for my method, then the request variable is created and the get variable is created and those variables get dumped into the URL. Okay. However, if I manually go to any URL on any web page that's running PHP on the planet, other ones that don't use PHP to also do it, but the variables are different. It's a different thing, but same idea. So we're talking PHP only here. Any website on the planet, if I go to their URL and I manually go up in the URL browser and I type that in, that variable will get created. Both of those will get created if I stick them up there. So I can go to Amazon right now and create a get variable on their server in their get variable. I can go there and just tack something onto the end of the URL and poof, it'll create a get variable. Now, their code doesn't know to look for it because it's just me randomly putting stuff on there, but it will create one, right? Questions about that idea? To the code. Let's just take a quick look at a website here. Let's go to, we'll go Amazon, and we'll click on this bookshelf here. Look at this URL here. I'm going to grab it and dump it into a text editor for a moment. And you will see there's a question mark which separates the variables from the URL, and there's an ampersand separating each variable. There's only two in this particular case. So somewhere, not somewhere, specifically in the get, there is a pf_rd_rth element, and it happens to be equal to that value. This is all on Amazon server. Now their code looks for get the pf_rd_rth element in the get array and does something with it. They know what that variable means, they know what it does. That's their code, right? I can tack on to the very end of that if I wanted to. I'll just add another variable, and Beavis equals, or not that, name. They probably have a name element. Let's do, we'll call it f-name -first, which is ridiculous, but they probably don't have that. Equals Beavis. And nothing changes here, but now their get has an f-name-first element. Firstth element, and it's set equal to Beavis. Their code is not looking for that, so it doesn't do anything, but it's there. You can add that to anything. You can add that to any URL you want to. Why do we want to do that? That's the question. We're going to get there, I promise. All right, how do we feel about these variables, the three variables, post, get, and request? We'll make sure those are pretty clear, and we're going to see them in action here in just a minute. First thing I want to do in our Palindrome site is I want, when I go here, to have a form. And the form is going to be them entering in what word they want to search for. Right now we're searching for cat, and it only looks for cats. I want them to be able to choose what we search for. Simple. Later we're going to add the functionality to let them choose which palindromes to search, to what palindromes to test, but that's a little bit more intricate. We'll do that next time. But for now, just a simple little search here. So I want to turn this index page into a page called palindrome.php, and my index page is going to be the form. When I click the submit button on the form, it's going to go to Palindrome. Dig it?
That's a dick'em smack.
So to do that, I'm going to just save this as Palindrome, and then I'm going to create an empty index page. And that's it. So that's our index page. We're going to put a form here. They're going to enter something in the form, and then we're going to process it on the Palindrome page. Good? So now if I refresh this, it's nothing because we just emptied it out. But if I go to /palindrome.php, there's all that stuff we built. All right. So far so good. I didn't do anything super crazy. I want to slightly refactor our code just a little bit because keep in mind, we are now searching for not evil anymore, but whatever they ask us to search for, right? So we want that to be just some word, not evil or not cats anymore. So we're going to change this to word counter. And now everywhere I'm referring to the evil counter, I got to change that to word. All right, so you can do copy and search and replace if you want to. I think there's just only one instance there and there, and I think that's it. So that shouldn't have changed anything. Let's just test it, refresh, and we get an error on line 18. Undefined variable on line 18, which means I missed one right there. There we go. Okay. Now that sentence needs to be changed a little bit, right? So there are that many, whatever word counter is, instances of evil on this site for now. Eventually we're going to change that with a variable that they give us, the user gives us. That make sense? Yeah? Okay. So far so good. Next thing. I don't like that I have a loop in my main section. Think about, that's one time I will ask you to think like Java for a minute if you know that, how that works. In your public static void main, what do you have? You just have a list of functions, right? And they're calling other things. You don't have a lot of code in there, just calls to other places, keeps the code clean. So I want to, this loop right here, I don't want to do this. I want to make inside my output loop, I want to hand off the array from line 14 to my function and loop through it in the function. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So I'm going to put this for each loop inside the output function down here. So it's going to loop through as many times as we tell it to. And right now I have the inputs array. Check this out. Right here, instead of this for each loop, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say echo that, and I'm going to pass that array right to it. Everybody see what I'm doing there? I'm passing the array. Now, when I get down here to this array, this function, this suddenly is now an array. Magically. I don't have to change the data type. It just, because I gave it an array, it is an array. I just handed off inputs right here to the output function, and it is now, that variable becomes an array. Okay? So I'm going to give it a different name so it's less confusing. Input array. All right? Call it whatever you want. Next up, I need to loop through the input array. Just use a for each loop. And then I need to loop through it and just run this code in the loop. That's the same thing as what I was doing here on line 16. I was looping through the array and I was just calling this function. Well, now in the function I'm going to do all that looping. So I only have to call the function once instead of calling it however many times I'm looping through up there on line 16. Does everybody understand what I'm doing there? Yep, okay. So here we go, real quick. It's simple. All I got to do is right here, for each, loop through the input array as, I have to give it a variable name. We'll give that in a minute. Bracket this out. Build this huge variable. We're almost there. There's one little change we'll have to make. What should I give that name? There's a very specific name that would be the perfect name to give it. Give you a hint. Line 32, line 38, line 39, line 40, line 36. Input. Because that's already what my code is looking for, is some variable called input. Right? If I were doing a for loop, then I'd have to change all these to input array bracket I or whatever. But since I'm doing a for each loop, I just call it some variable. Why not call it input? Because I'm already referring to input inside the loop. Does that make sense? Now this will work, except it won't look styled properly because, remember I added this little section thing right here before it? Or sorry, right here, the section. Yeah? So I need to stick that in there. There's a couple problems with my loop. I want to, that loop, when all is said and done, it's supposed to build multiple little squares, right? But every time I run the loop, it empties the return variable out to 0, to nothing. And so when all is said and done, it's only going to have one palindrome in it. Watch this. If I didn't make any mistakes, hopefully. Refresh. And that's it. It just has the one palindrome and the style's missing. Because every time it ran the loop, it just emptied this variable out and it just added the most recent one. Race car is the last one on the list. That's why it's the one that showed up. Okay? So first thing I need to do is just get this out of here. Get it out of the for each loop. And now, this will be closer to what I'm looking for. Now it's going to build the array, right? It empties the array out once when we call the function. Or not the array, but the return variable. And then it builds it up and it keeps dot equals, right? It keeps tacking on more and more and more. So now each one gets tacked on there. And now they're all there, but the style is wonky because I took out the section tag. So I got to add the section tag back in. Well, each one of these starts and ends with a section. So I need a section right there. And I need a section right here. Remember, originally we had this. I said echo section and then call the function. So it just called the function one time, put a section around this whole entire section here that didn't have the tag section in it. And then it looped and it did it again. And so it's tacking on the section right here in line 16. Well, now I just put all that in the function so it happens automatically, and all I gotta do is just say echo that out. That should be what we need. If I refresh it, we're back to where we started. But it's a little bit cleaner code, okay? Make sense? So I can get rid of this. This magic code, we're gonna start building this today, slowly but surely. And the last thing here, not the last thing, one other thing, I like to take all my global variables here and put them at the very top of the page. So I'm gonna get that, stick it up here. So now I got this nice global variable section. If I have more global variables, I'll put them up there. But for now, this is good. This eventually is going to be replaced by user input. And maybe that'll turn into a function, but for now, we're going to leave it the way it is. The last thing I want to do is clean this up where I can just say echo word counter or something like that, right? So let's see if we can figure out how to do that. Let's make a little function here. Function, I don't know, word count output or something like that. And it's basically just going to have this right here, echo that. The only thing that we need to deal with is that's a global variable, right? So we need to make sure we tell it global word counter, right? Because that is global, it's not inside our function. And eventually that'll be replaced with whatever word the user entered. So now all I have to do is just echo that out. And I echo that out after I display all the inputs. Much cleaner. I'll run it to prove that it works, but do we understand everything I just did? This is basic refactoring stuff, right? Refresh it and everything looks the same. But now the code's a little bit better and it's going to set us up to build this form and process it. All right, so here we go. On the index page, we're going to build the form. Easy. We know how to do this, right? We need a form, and we have a form, and we're going to have input, and the type is text, and the name is going to be search word. So in our request variable and the post or the get, we're going to create a search word element, right? When we hit submit, it's going to create that in the get or the post and also in the request. Okay, and we'll even do a placeholder. Good enough. Input type equals submit, and we're going to leave it at that. It's good enough. Don't worry about the action. Don't worry about the method just yet. Let's just look at this on our home page now. We go back here. There's our form. I already added some CSS in the background to make it look okay, right? Enter a word, and then we put it in. Now, if I put a word in right now, the default behavior for for method is get. That is the default behavior. The default action is whatever page you're on. So the default action URL is the one we're on. The default method is get. So when I hit submit, what do you expect to happen? It'll stay on the same page, but it'll add on to their question mark, search word equals word. Or let's put cat or whatever, or Beavis, or Brevis. Submit, and there you go. Search word equals Brevis, okay? That's the default behavior. Well, I want to direct this to the Palindrome page. So action equals palindrome.php. So now when I do it, it's going to go to the Palindrome page and it's going to add search word equals Brevis to the Palindrome page, or whatever word. We'll do a new one here, dog, submit. And now it went to the Palindrome page and it put search word equals dog. Dig it?
Dig 'em.
Okay, so this is working so far. Now all I got to do really, there's more to it than that, but let's just start simple. Up here in the top, let's just make a variable that says, we'll call it search word equals get, was it search word? Is that what I called it? Like that? Yep. So now there's this variable called search word, and now down here where I'm doing my counting increment right here, where's my cat counter? Right here. if the input is equal to cat increment, I just got to change that to that. Do you guys agree that that's correct? Other than that is a global variable, and I have to say as much. But does that conceptually make sense? That's all we're doing, right? So let's just also call the global variable there. Okay, and that's it. That should work. So let's start easy with one we know is there. Let's put cat there. And there are 2 instances of evil on the site, right? And there are 2 versions of cat. Let's go back and let's try chicken, because I know that was on there. And there's chicken, but it says 0, because of that problem we talked about last time, which is chicken is that the 0th element in that array. And remember, that function that's searching for it returns the number of the array you're at. 0 is false in PHP, right? So easy fix for that. Right here, string POS, that returns where in the array the word that you're searching for is. Chicken is at the 0th element in the array. So rather than saying if this is true, because that's all I'm saying there, I'm essentially saying this, right? That's all I'm really saying. But 0 is not true. 0 is false. So how could I get around that? Okay, so you could do greater than or equal to 0. You could do that. Or you could do, how about let's start here. Not equal to false. Right? If it's not equal to false, this isn't quite right because 0 is still equal to false, right? So if we run this, it's still going to give us, if I just refresh it, it'll reload the form. It still says 0. Okay? Or not reload the form, but reload the get. But if I say this, that's not a thing in Java. This means exactly equal on a binary level, right? It's got a counterpart that's this, triple equal, okay? 2-second tangent here. 5 is equal to 5. That's true. 5, that is not true. Okay, the first one, line 3, is true. Line 5 is not true. It's not exactly on a binary level equal to it. The number 5 and the string 5 are equal in the world of PHP because they're both true. But this is saying that the number 5 and the string 5 are exactly the same on all levels, and they are not. Okay? So the triple equal, you can't even do that in Java because you can't compare a string and an int in Java. It won't even let you try that, right? All right, so we'll talk more about those operators later, but this will actually work. This means it's like 100% on a deep, like a lot of people say deeply equal to, they'll use that phrase. This is deeply not equal to false. No, this means that it's literally not one thing. The Boolean value false. Anything else on the planet will work. 0, -1, chicken, Beavis, whatever is not binarily false, like the actual binary level false. So that should give us our fix there, and now we have one instance of not evil, but chicken, right? Okay, let's fix that so it doesn't say evil anymore, and it says chicken, or whatever the word is. And remember our word variable here, right? We just need to say it right there. That's it. Now it'll say there are that many instances of the word chicken. Oh, sorry. Search word. Yeah, this one. Now it says that's a global variable. Stand by. There we go. There are one instance of, and that's grammatic issues aside, there's one instance of chicken on this site. Now, this business of calling all these global variables, not a fan. Okay? Not a fan of that. So what I like to do is pass them in as parameters, right? So we're going to call the word output right here by passing in the search word, okay? And at this level on line 20, we have access to the global variable because we are outside of any function. So I can just pass in search word, and I can just call it I can leave it as search word because it's a different variable, or I can just call it SW maybe, make it a little simpler, okay? And that works just fine. The question was, can you access the post variable inside the function? And you can, because it's a super global. And so if that's the case, why not just right here put the post or the get variable right there directly, right? You can. However, this is not good enough right here. There's some issues. For example, what if they just leave it blank? Right? We got to do some error trapping. Okay? That's thing number one. Thing number two, I want to get that out of the get and put it into the post so it's not up in the URL. Okay, so let's fix that real quick. And in our form, we're just going to tell it that the method is post instead of the default get. And then we just simply have to change this to look in the post right here. Okay, that shouldn't change anything if I put some actual value in there. Okay, so there we go. It's all working fine. We just switched it to post. We need to do some error trapping here. We got to trap some errors because if they leave it blank, that's an issue. So the first thing I'm going to do is check to see if the post variable was even set. What sets it? Then clicking the submit button. If they didn't click the submit button, then it's not set. Okay. So let's just check if there's actually a function for that. Is set this variable right here. There. If that's set, then we'll do this. This opens up a whole other can of worms though. This will still give us an error if we have nothing in the form. Okay. Clear that out. Refresh. Submit. And we still get all those errors because the variable is set. It's just empty. So we want to check to make sure it's not empty. There's a function for that. Empty. We want to make sure it's not empty. If it's not empty, if that specific element, the search word element is not empty, then we're almost good to go, right? So let's first of all run it with something in it. Works okay. What do you expect to happen if I don't put anything in it? There's actually going to be an error. Because in the event that this is, well, it's okay to not have an else, but in this case, search word never gets created. And so later in my code, when I try to call search word, I can't because it doesn't exist. Right? Because if the post is empty, if that variable is empty, then this never gets created. So that doesn't exist. And you'll see that exact error right now, or not. That should have given us an error. Oh, I declared it right there. Man, good catch. The reason why is because right here when I said global word counter, I declared it globally. Like I declared it outside of myself, outside the function, which is another reason why you should pass things in as a parameter, right? Okay, and actually, so I apologize. No, not on line 29. I meant on line 34 is what I meant. Yeah, the search word right there. I apologize. But that same problem. I just pointed to the wrong place. Line 34. So we want to pass this in as a parameter right here. So let's go back up here, pass in search word, add it as a new parameter right there in my function here, and down here no longer create a global version of it, and we'll just take it right there as an input parameter. Does everybody understand what just happened there? I'm glad you caught that. That was a good catch. So now we should get the error I was expecting, okay? So what I've done, we're going to hopefully create a variable here, add it to the output as a parameter, and then down here in the output function, it gets passed in, and now we're referring to this local one. In fact, let's do the same thing where we call it SW. I think that's all the instances of it there. So now, hopefully we'll get an error, which you don't normally say that when you're writing code, but okay, there's our error, which I expected, that the variable's not defined, search word, it's not defined. And even if this is here, it's going to give me that because it's empty, right? Because it's empty, that variable never got defined. Hallelujah. Good catch, Sally. Very good. Now, I put an else statement, and I can just define it. Search word equals, we can have a default, cat, something like that. So now, if they don't put anything, the default behavior will be just find the cats. Okay? but we want something better than that. Okay, there's a real easy thing you can do here. Just redirect them to the home page. Really easy to do that. So if that doesn't happen, then I want you to, here's a new function for you, header, location. We just want to go back one to the root. I could put index.php if I wanted to, but just doing dot just means go back to the root of wherever you're at. Right? That'll just send you back to the home page. Now listen very carefully. If you only hear one thing today, this is it. When you do a header function, it has to be above all HTML code. You cannot put it inside your HTML code. If you do that, it'll work just fine on Champ, but when you upload it, it's going to give you hell. Right? It will not work. Pardon my French. There's no other way to describe what you'll go through if you do that wrong. But now let's test this out. Let's go back to the home page, clear this crap out of there just to be extra clear. Hit submit and watch. I just stay here. I don't go anywhere. In fact, if I try to go directly to the Palindrome page, it redirects me to the home page because the get variable doesn't exist. Right? So this is good, except its user experience is poor. They're like, why isn't it working? So we need to give them a message, right? Easy. Just right inside of our form here on the index page. Now, if I do this, it says enter something. But that's a problem because if I just come here fresh, it says enter something, right? This is an issue. So here's where the get can come in handy. To your question 7 hours ago, here's where the get comes in handy, okay? What I'm going to do is in the get here, in the URL, I want to put something that's like error equals true, right? And if that's in there, then I want this message to show, otherwise I don't. Okay? How do I get it up there? We'll get to that in just a second, but I want that to be the case. So if I have this where it says error equals true, show this message. Okay, easy. Come here on the home page and we'll do something like this. We'll just say if, we gotta open up the PHP here. If is set get error, if that's set, and get the errorth element equals true. It's actually the word true, it's not the binary value true, just a string. If all that's true, now the reason I have to do it this way, if I try to check its value here, before I see if it's even set, I'll get an error saying that doesn't exist. Right? So is it set and is it true? If it's true, then echo this message. Like that. Otherwise, don't echo the message. There we go. No message. As soon as I do this and put in the URL, error equals true, I get the message. Now, how do we get that up in the URL? Super easy. Right here, when I tell them to redirect to the index.php or whatever, just put that on there. Redirect to that. Right? And so again, I could put index.php here if I wanted, if that makes it a little more clear for you. Okay? Both of those work just fine. Okay, but putting the dot there, it's just saying just go up to the folder that you're in. That's all that means. Okay? They both work. Refresh it. And let's clear this out. Nothing there. I click submit and it's going to come back here. Tack that on and it looked for it and it says enter something. Now there's an error message. That's very elementary error trapping, right, for form validation. How do we feel about all of that?